It's fair to say virtually no one saw the protests in Charlottesville coming with the force they did last weekend. And while the press is still sorting out some of the facts, one thing is clear. There are not two sets of facts, nor are there two sides to the story.
Two streets, our streets. White lives matter. White lives matter.
This is the start of a 21-minute video aired by Vice TV after one of its reporters spent the weekend with white nationalist protesters who had gathered in Charlottesville.
When did you get into, as you said, the racial stuff?
When the Trayvon Martin case happened, you know, Michael Brown and Tamir Rice and all these different things happen, every single case, it's some little black ass behaving like a savage, and he gets himself in trouble.
White nationalist Christopher Cantwell is the voice of the video, but he was representative of hundreds of torch-carrying white men, ostensibly there to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee.
But they're really here to show that they're more than an internet meme, that they're a big, real presence.
But the President of the United States claimed otherwise, saying some of them were good guys.
You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Tell that to Vice TV reporter Ellie Reeves, who calmly explained to CNN's Anderson Cooper that everyone in the torch-carrying protest was like-minded.
And when the president says that there were good people at this march, that they were quietly there to protest a removal of the Robert E. Lee statue, is that true?
No. Everyone who was there knew what they were doing.
Trump, though, says he waits for the facts before making a statement.
Is that true? Is that his record, that he waits for the facts before he makes a statement? No. It's definitely not true.
It's also not true that there are two sides to every story. You know, Dan, that seems to be the problem here, that literally the old cliche of parallel universes, that people are seeing the same events unfold, the same people interacting and coming up with two different conclusions. Right. This young reporter, and by the way, shout out to Vice TV and Ellie, you say her name, even though it looks like Ellie Reeves, you know, being in the middle of that thing, with fearless, it appeared, and really 21 minutes, well worth your time if you haven't seen it. But, you know, the president saying, oh, I watched those tapes closer than any of you, and I know. How could he say that when this young woman saw something that was unfolding before her face?
Exactly. You know, I was reminded, and someone sent this around on Facebook this week, Bob Simon, who passed away, the former 60 Minutes correspondent, in a speech that he gave several years ago, he talked about how sometimes there really aren't two sides to every story. He covered stories in Rwanda and Sarajevo, and when you go to a particular story, sometimes, you know, everyone wants to give this balance. It's what reporters are trained to do. You go in and you find out, well, there is this group and they have a message and they're doing this, and there's this group and they're doing that. But sometimes, you know, there is a level of evil that you can't present both sides. It is right and it's wrong. And, you know, Anderson Cooper, it's interesting. It's not certainly along the lines of what happened here, but remember, he made his claim to fame was what he was able to do in Katrina when he called out Mary Landrieu because she was praising, you know, former president, first responders and everyone, and he called her out and said, how can you be doing this when, you know, there's a body that's been sitting out there in the road for 48 hours and so forth. So, you know, you have to sort of throw out the general rules sometimes when a story reaches a different kind of level. And this was one of those. Katrina was one of those. Sarajevo, Rwanda. That's where the typical rules of journalism, I think, don't apply.
I mean, it's sad to see the president hiding behind this because there are complexities to the conversation about race. I think we're moving in certain directions, but there are complexities to the issue of what to remove and what to keep. We've seen it with the Confederate statues we're talking about now. We've seen it at Princeton with the question of what to do with the Woodrow Wilson School. I mean, there are open questions that we need to grapple with. That's what was so stunning, maybe not shocking given what we know about Trump, but saying white supremacy is bad is the easiest thing. It's the gimmiest gimme of all gimmies. And the fact that he couldn't do it then opens up all kinds of questions about where he really stands and what's in the depth of his soul if he has one.
You know, Bill Kovach and Tom Rosenstiel in their book, The Elements of Journalism, write, journalism's first obligation is to the truth. Not balance, not getting all sides. The reason we talk to a range of sources is to try to get the best version of the truth that we can get, not to present balance at all costs. Now, I think when you have a story like this, it really exposes the fundamental flaws in the idea that everything has to be neatly balanced. But the fact is, our goal should be telling the truth as best as we can determine it in all stories, not just the big, important, scary ones like this.
So I would say that's exactly what Ellie Reeve did with her documentary,
Yes.
because the essence of a really good documentary is the testimony from the people who live it, and you want it backed up by documentation. So she did one and the same by letting it really be cinema verite. And in between, she really backed down from herself and only asked the follow-up questions that you and I would want to know, like, how can you say that? Or what about this? And what young woman was killed? What do you mean by violence? He answered all of those questions, the guy on the right side.
Cantwell.
Right, and then Mr. Cantwell.
Yeah.
And then all the other people in their pain and the aftermath of Heather Heyer's death and what had happened there, and they're asking themselves what's going on. I mean, it was all there, and that to me was the best version of the truth put together in a very short period of time and allowed everybody else, no matter where you come at it, to see exactly what happened.
Right. I agree. Yeah, sometimes you just have to point the camera or point the microphone and let that be the story, rather than saying, okay, now I have to structure it this way and get this voice and that voice. And you know, it's the way you're taught as a reporter, and I know we're all trying to get at the truth, but especially when you're doing political stories, for example. Sometimes you're even timing out. Well, I gave this Republicans a certain amount of time. I got to get Democrat. But that sometimes, I think, does get in the way of what the true story is.
But I mean, you also have the President of the United States obfuscating issues. I mean,
Right.
Yes.
Christopher Cantwell, again, not to keep quoting him, but he claimed that the guy who backed the car into Heather Heyer and other people was justified because somebody had pushed his car or something like that, or came at him. And the president, in some ways, was saying, yeah, there was like-minded, there was violence on both sides. There was no proof that there was equal kinds of violence. And the fact that clearly the right-wing group started it, you know.
And we're
Well,
all
that's-
saying
yeah,
this, but kudos to HBO
I know, yeah.
for putting that Vice
They just
news
came
piece
on my
out for
radar a
free.
few weeks ago. I didn't never heard of Vice TV. I hadn't heard of
Well,
it.
I had heard of it, but I
No, they're
mean,
doing
if,
really good.
if
Start watching it.
HBO
Well, I don't
hadn't
get
released
HBO,
it, we wouldn't
so.
have gotten
Well, I
to
get
see
it. It's
it.
just not turned on.
YouTube coming to
Oh, there you
Boston
go.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.